The porcelain of the sink was cool beneath my fingertips, a stark contrast to the slow burn that had begun to simmer beneath my skin, a constant, low-grade fever that nothing seemed able to quell. I stared at my reflection, or rather at the carefully constructed facade that stared back. My hair, a chestnut wave, perfectly framed a face that looked rested, even content. My eyes, perhaps a little too wide, held a practiced sparkle. A tiny frown line, almost invisible, hinted at the tension I held prisoner behind the mask. This was the woman I presented to the world. Clara, wife of David, keeper of an immaculate home, host of charming dinner parties, successful freelance graphic designer. Our life was a well-curated Instagram feed come to life. Sun-drenched mornings, shared laughter over strong coffee, evening strolls holding hands. We had the sprawling, sun-drenched house in the suburbs, complete with a garden David meticulously tended, and the 2 golden retrievers, their names a playful nod to our favorite literary characters. Everyone said we were the perfect couple, and for a long time I believed it too, or at least I desperately wanted to. David was a good man, kind, stable, dependable. He remembered my favorite brand of tea, left a warm towel on the radiator for me after my morning shower, and never, not once, raised his voice in anger. He worked hard, providing for us with a quiet dedication that was admirable. We had built this life together, brick by brick, expectation by expectation. Our conversations revolved around shared calendars, dinner plans, the dog's vet appointments, the rising cost of utilities, or the latest political punditry. They were practical, predictable, safe. But somewhere along the line, the space between his sentences, the silences that stretched between our bodies on the sofa, had become vast and cold, an echoing chasm. I remembered a time when David's touch sent a shiver of genuine excitement through me, a promise of something warm and intimate. Now, when his hand brushed mine, it was a familiar comfort, like the worn fabric of my favorite armchair. Pleasant, but without thrill, without surprise. Sex had become a routine, a quiet act of duty performed in the semi-darkness of our bedroom, concluded with a tender peck on the forehead and a turning of backs. There was no passion, no exploration, no sense of being truly seen or desired. I felt like a museum piece, admired for my aesthetics and preserved carefully, but never truly touched, never truly lived in. The loneliness was a physical weight in my chest, a persistent ache just behind my sternum. It wasn't the kind of loneliness that came from being alone in a room, but the far more insidious kind that came from being utterly alone with someone. I would lie awake at night, listening to David's even breathing beside me, the quiet tick of the alarm clock, and feel a profound sense of isolation. My mind would race, cataloging every unmet desire, every unspoken thought, every yearning that I hadn't even dared to articulate to myself, let alone to him. I craved a spark, a shared intensity, a connection that went beyond the mundane tapestry of our existence. I craved to feel alive, truly alive, again. I would press my palms against my temples, willing the thoughts to cease, the gnawing emptiness to subside, desperate for the peaceful oblivion of sleep. It rarely came easily. And then, the heir was Mark. Curious? Mark was David's best friend. He had been a constant in our lives since before David and I even got married, a jovial, easygoing presence who completed our social triangle. He was all broad shoulders and quick wit, with a laugh that boomed from his chest and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. David and Mark had known each other since childhood, a bond forged in scraped knees and shared secrets. I saw Mark every few weeks at dinner parties, barbecues, or our standing Sunday brunch. He was part of the furniture, a cherished fixture, like a favorite piece of art on the wall. Thoughtful, I admired him, liked him, genuinely enjoyed his company. There was no flicker of anything more. Not for years. He was just Mark, David's best friend. The shift began subtly, imperceptibly at first, like the slow drift of a continental plate. It started with the texts. David was always meticulously organized, often sending out group texts to plan gatherings. Mark, bless his playful heart, would often send a follow-up, a quick joke, a playful jab, or a commentary on the group chat itself. One Tuesday evening, David was buried deep in his work, hunched over his laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating his focused profile. My own work was done, the house quiet save for the rhythmic clicking of David's keyboard. My phone buzzed. It was Mark. David sent me the recipe for the lamb, You know, the lamb. My stomach is already grumbling in anticipation. I smiled. It's a good one. Careful not to over-roast it. My roasting skills are legendary, Clara. You wound me. Followed by a laughing emoji. Prove it this Sunday then, I typed, a lightness blooming in my chest. Oh,
Will. Question though. That little herb you garnish it with, the one that looks like tiny, feathery leaves, what is it again? I always forget. Sarcastic. It was dill. He knew it was dill. We'd used it 100 times. Chuckles. Dill? I replied, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips. Ah, yes, my nemesis, always mocking me with its delicate beauty. And we continued like that, a light, teasing banter for another 10 minutes. It was nothing, purely innocent. Long pause. But David was 3 feet away, engrossed, oblivious, curious, and I felt a small, secret thrill, like I was holding a precious, warm stone in my palm. My pulse fluttered, an unfamiliar feeling. It was the thrill of being seen, truly engaged with, outside the practical sphere of my marriage.
Over the next few weeks, those casual texts became more frequent, more direct. They weren't about dinner plans anymore. They were about a documentary we'd both watched, a quirky article he'd stumbled upon, a song he'd heard that reminded him of a story I'd once told. He'd text late, sometimes past 11, when David was usually asleep, the soft murmur of his breathing the only sound in the room. I'd slip my phone under the covers, the screen a miniature sun in the darkness, and the words would appear, each one a small drop of warmth in the cool emptiness of my nights. Just saw this ridiculously elaborate cat video. Reminded me of your obsession with Fluffernutter's antics. I'd giggle silently, covering my mouth, a sound I hadn't made in months. He is majestic, thank you very much. And he demands tribute. Understood. Offerings will be presented Sunday. What does a king demand these days? Wet food? A belly rub from a stranger?
Stick. Both. And intellectual stimulation. It was harmless. It was friendly. He was David's best friend. But then I started to notice the way my heart would give a little skip when his name appeared on my screen. I'd catch myself rereading his messages, dissecting the emojis, the playful tone. Thoughtful, I'd begin to anticipate them, a knot of expectation tightening in my stomach as evening approached. Then came the glances. At dinner parties, when David was engrossed in conversation with someone else, I'd feel Mark's eyes on me. I'd look up, and our gazes would lock for just a beat too long, a silent acknowledgement that transcended the surface chatter. Excited. A small, knowing smile would touch his lips, and a shiver, not entirely unpleasant, would trace its way down my spine. The air around us seemed to thicken, charged with an unspoken understanding. Long pause. It felt dangerous, thrilling, intoxicating. It was a language I hadn't realized I'd been starving to speak.
My internal monologue became a tangled mess of denial and rationalization. He's just being friendly. I'm just enjoying being paid attention to. It's harmless. David wouldn't care. There's nothing to care about. But the constant thrum of adrenaline whenever I saw his name, whenever he looked at me, whenever he found a way to stand just a little closer to me in a crowded room, belied my protestations. My body hummed with a nascent energy, a waking up of senses that had long been dormant. I felt guilty, a dull ache that resonated with every heartbeat, but it was overshadowed by the intoxicating rush of novelty, of being desired, even if it was only in my head. The chasm in my marriage felt wider, colder, and Mark's attention felt like a warm, forbidden bridge. The line was a whisper, a breath, a touch, so subtle that for a fleeting second, I could almost pretend it hadn't been crossed. It was David's annual company retreat. He was gone for a long week.
Weekend, Friday through Sunday. He'd packed his bag with his usual meticulousness, kissed me goodbye with his usual soft peck, and left with the solemn promise of a souvenir fridge magnet. Sighs. The house felt cavernous after he left, the silence deafening. I spent Friday night watching a terrible rom-com, eating ice cream straight from the tub, and feeling the familiar melancholy settle in. Saturday arrived, gray and overcast. I was curled on the sofa with a book, one of the dogs snoring softly at my feet, when my phone vibrated. A text from Mark. Hey, Clara, David told me you were holding down the fort. I'm bored out of my mind. Want to grab a coffee or something? Keep each other sane? Surprised. My heart gave a little jolt. Just coffee. Innocent. And David would be okay with it, wouldn't he? Mark was his best friend. We were just friends. Rushed. Sounds good, I typed back, my fingers trembling ever so slightly. There's a new place down by the park. They do amazing lattes.
The coffee was warm in my hands, the ceramic mug radiating heat through my palms. We talked for an hour, then 2. We moved from the coffee shop to a bench in the park, the air crisp and smelling of damp earth. We talked about everything and nothing. His latest photography project, my frustrations with a difficult client, memories of past shared vacations with David. He leaned forward, listening intently, his eyes on mine, his whole presence radiating a focus that I realized, with a sudden sharp pang, I hadn't received from David in years. He laughed at my jokes, a deep, resonant sound that made my stomach flutter. He empathized with my worries, his brow furrowing with genuine concern. It felt like I was being seen, truly understood, in a way I hadn't experienced in such a long time. The connection was palpable, a shimmering thread weaving between us. As the afternoon light began to wane, a chill settling in, he walked
Me back to my car. We stood by the driver's side door, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. My skin tingled with an awareness of him, his proximity, the scent of his subtle cologne, a mix of citrus and wood smoke, filling my senses. Thanks for coming out, Clara, he said, thoughtful, his voice a little lower than usual. I really needed that. Me too, Mark, I replied. Whispers, my voice barely a whisper. My gaze was drawn to his lips, then back to his eyes, a desperate hope and fear warring within me. He reached out, his hand hovering for a second, then gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers grazed my cheek, a feather-light touch that sent a bolt of electricity straight through me. Gasps. My breath hitched. The world seemed to narrow to just the two of us, bathed in the fading light. His thumb brushed over my cheekbone, a lingering stroke. His eyes were dark, intense, burning with an unspoken question. Curious. I didn't pull away. I leaned in, infinitesimally, a silent invitation, excited, and then his lips were on mine.
It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was immediate, urgent, laced with a desperation that mirrored my own. His hand moved from my cheek to the back of my neck, pulling me closer, his fingers tangling in my hair. My own hands, seemingly with a will of their own, found purchase on his shoulders, clinging to the thick fabric of his jacket. The world tilted, the taste of his lips, the slight stubble on his jaw pressing against my skin, the faint scent of coffee and him. My mind, usually a fortress of anxious thoughts, went utterly blank, replaced by a pure, visceral sensation. It was raw, exhilarating, terrifying. A tidal wave of feeling crashed over me, washing away years of quiet desperation, of feeling invisible. It was wrong, so utterly, irrevocably wrong. This was David's best friend. This was a betrayal of everything. But in that moment, all I could feel was the delicious, dangerous spark of life, of desire, of being consumed. My knees felt weak, my chest heat.
I could feel the frantic thumping of my own heart against my ribs, an insistent drumbeat of trespass. Gasps. We broke apart, gasping slightly, our eyes still locked, searching, questioning. The air between us crackled, thick with what had just transpired. His gaze was apologetic, yet still held a fire that thrilled me. My own face flushed, a heat spreading from my chest to my cheeks. Sad. A profound wave of shame, cold and cutting, instantly followed the exhilarating rush. It was like falling from a great height, the plummet back to reality, swift and brutal. Whispers. Clara, he breathed, his voice rough, thoughtful. I couldn't speak. My mouth felt dry, metallic. My head pounded. Sad. I shouldn't have, he said, stepping back, running a hand through his hair, his eyes filled with a confusion that matched my own.
I nodded, unable to meet his gaze, staring instead at the wet leaves clinging to the asphalt. A tremor ran through me. It was done. The line was crossed, and a part of me, the part that had been starving, was already reeling from the potent, devastating taste of forbidden fruit. The next morning, the sun streamed through the bedroom window as if nothing had changed, but my world had been irrevocably altered. A thick, oppressive blanket of guilt had settled over me, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't a fleeting pang. It was a constant, physical presence, a knot in my stomach that made every mouthful of food feel like ash, every breath a shallow struggle. I found myself staring blankly at the wall, lost in replays of the previous day, the feeling of his lips, the intensity of his gaze, followed by the chilling realization of what I had done. Living a double life was like walking a tie.
Trope stretched over a chasm of fear. Every mundane conversation with David felt like a performance, an elaborate charade designed to conceal the dark secret I now carried. I scrutinized his face for any hint of suspicion, my heart hammering against my ribs whenever his gaze lingered on me for a moment too long. My laughter felt forced, my smiles brittle. Sad. The warmth I once felt for him, a comfortable, steady flame, was now tinged with a corrosive mixture of tenderness and deep, gut-wrenching shame. I felt like a fraud, a stranger inhabiting my own skin, and the reflection that greeted me in the mirror each morning was increasingly unfamiliar, haunted by shadows under the eyes and a perpetual tremor in my hands. Energetic. Mark and I fell into a pattern that was as intoxicating as it was destructive. Our texts became bolder, more frequent, a secret language woven through the digital ether. We spoke in hushed tones, veiled references, and inside jokes that only we understood. He would find excuses to call, brief, clandestine conversations when David was out of the room or lost in his work. Curious? Each clandestine interaction was a potent shot of adrenaline, a dangerous thrill that momentarily quieted the gnawing guilt.
The physical encounters were rare, meticulously planned, and shrouded in secrecy. A quick meetup in a secluded park, ostensibly to discuss David's birthday gift, where a stolen kiss was exchanged, fervent and hungry. A coffee run that turned into an hour spent in the anonymous quiet of my car, parked far from home, hands clasped, foreheads touching, sharing hushed words and desperate confessions of mutual yearning. Once, David went out of town for a conference, leaving me alone. Mark showed up with a bottle of wine and a pizza, ostensibly to keep me company. The evening blurred into a haze of wine, whispered confessions, and eventually, the muffled sounds of our frantic intimacy in my own bed, David's side of the bed, the very sheets that held the scent of my husband. The sensory details of those moments are branded into my memory. The frantic unbuttoning of shirts, the scent of his skin, a muskier, wilder scent than David's familiar cleanliness, the taste of wine and desire on his tongue, the desperate clenching of my fingers in his hair, the whispered pleas and gasps that filled the temporary silence of our stolen world, energetic. In those moments, shame receded, replaced by an overwhelming primal sense of being truly alive, truly desired, sad. It was a terrifying, exhilarating high, immediately followed by the sickening plunge into self-loathing. The paranoia was a constant companion, a tightening band around my chest. Every unexpected knock on the door, every unfamiliar car driving slowly down our street, every accidental glance from a neighbor felt like impending exposure, thoughtful. I became a master of alibis, weaving intricate webs of believable lies, a tapestry of deception that felt increasingly fragile. My phone became a dangerous extension of myself. I kept it locked, always facing down, jumping whenever a notification chimed. I scrubbed my browser history meticulously, deleted texts the moment they were read, and checked Mark's social media for any unwitting hint of our connection. There were near misses that sent spikes of icy terror through my veins. Surprised once, at a casual backyard barbecue, David, in a burst of affectionate playfulness, threw his arm around Mark's shoulders, pulling him close. "My best buddy," he declared, beaming. Gasps. My gaze flickered to Mark, whose eyes met mine for a split second, a flash of shared panic and an almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. Frustrated, I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. I excused myself quickly, feigning a headache, needing to escape, to breathe. Another time, David mentioned Mark had called, sounding a little off, distracted. My stomach plummeted. Had Mark slipped up? Had I? I immediately fabricated a story about Mark having trouble with his new client and seeking my advice, leveraging my professional expertise to explain away any unusual phone activity or changes in his mood. David, trusting and unsuspecting, simply nodded, preoccupied with his own work. The relief that washed over me was so intense, it almost made me faint. My personality began to morph under the strain. I became jumpy, irritable, prone to snapping at David over trivial things, only to immediately regret it, smothering him with excessive apologies and manufactured affection. My sleep was fractured, haunted by vivid, guilt-ridden dreams where my secrets were shouted from the rooftops. I developed a nervous habit of biting the inside of my
cheek, a raw, constant reminder of the internal pressure. The woman I was becoming was unrecognizable to the woman I once was, or thought I was. Sad, the guilt was a heavy anchor, dragging me deeper into a murky, self-made swamp of deceit. Sad, the crash wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, agonizing implosion, a gradual crumbling of the precarious edifice I had constructed. It wasn't one single event, but rather the cumulative weight of the lies, the constant fear, the corrosive self-loathing that had eaten away at me from the inside out. Thoughtful, I had become a hollow shell, animated only by the desperate need to keep my secret buried. Sad. The breaking point arrived one particularly mundane Tuesday evening. David had returned from work, his usual quiet smile on his face. He kissed my forehead, went to change, and came back to the kitchen where I was stirring a pot of pasta sauce. He put his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder, his familiar scent, laundry detergent, and a faint hint of his aftershave filling my nostrils. "Curious. Rough day," he murmured, sensing my tension. "Sad. Just tired," I mumbled, my voice thin. Thoughtful, he squeezed me gently. "You work so hard, Clara. You deserve to relax."
And in that simple, innocent act of tenderness, in his quiet concern, a chasm opened inside me. His unconditional love, his utter lack of suspicion, felt like a burning brand on my skin. He was a good man, a truly decent man, and I had desecrated our life, our trust, with a casual cruelty that made my stomach churn. I remember standing there, the heavy ladle in my hand, the steam from the sauce blurring my vision, a sudden, overwhelming nausea rising in my throat. My vision swam, my chest constricted, a vice squeezing the air from my lungs. The weight of the lie, which had felt like a distant, menacing storm for so long, had finally broken and was pouring down on me, drowning me. I felt physically ill, a profound sickness that went deeper than anything I had ever experienced. My hands started to tremble uncontrollably, so violently that the ladle clattered against the side of the pot.
Sad that night I didn't sleep, not a wink. I lay next to David, his even breathing a stark contrast to the frantic pounding in my chest. Every nerve ending in my body felt raw, exposed. My mind raced, replaying every stolen kiss, every whispered word, every deceitful glance. Angry, I saw David's face, etched with trust, and I hated myself with an intensity that made my bones ache. The physical sensation of guilt was an overwhelming force, a lead weight pressing down on my chest, making it impossible to take a full breath. A constant tremor in my extremities, a churning in my gut that made me feel perpetually on the verge of vomiting. My mouth was dry, parched, despite drinking glass after glass of water. Gasps. A panic attack seized me in the pre-dawn hours. My heart thundered, threatening to burst from my ribs. My breathing became shallow, ragged gasps. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in. Sad, I felt an intense, irrational fear, convinced that David would wake up, look at me, and somehow know, simply by looking into my eyes. Tearful, I scrambled out of bed, retreating to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face. I gripped the edge of the sink, feeling the cold porcelain, and stared at my distorted reflection. What had I become? This gaunt, wild-eyed stranger was not me. This creature, riddled with fear and self-loathing, was a monster. The decision to confess solidified in those dark, lonely hours. It wasn't a noble decision, not born of courage or righteousness, but of desperation, of a profound need for release from the suffocating prison of my own making. I couldn't live with this secret anymore. The thought of continuing the charade, of looking into David's trusting eyes day after day, was more terrifying than any possible fallout from the truth. The fear of losing him, of shattering our life, was immense, a sharp blade twisting in my gut. But the fear of being me,
The deceitful, broken version of me was even greater. The next few days were a blur. I pulled away from Mark, sending him a curt text. "This has to stop. I can't do this anymore." I ignored his frantic calls and texts. The thought of his voice, his touch, now repugnant, tinged with the bitterness of my own betrayal. I lost my appetite,
MP Leetley. The smell of food made my stomach clench. I barely slept, existing in a state of hyper-alert anxiety, waiting for the right moment, steeling myself for the inevitable devastation. Thoughtful. I meticulously planned the conversation in my head, rehearsing the words over and over, each syllable tasting like ash. "I cheated on you. With Mark. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Sad. The words felt inadequate, hollow, utterly insufficient to convey the monumental nature of my transgression, the depth of the pain I was about to inflict. Tearful. My hands trembled constantly, a nervous tic that I couldn't control. My voice felt stuck in my throat, hoarse and reedy.
On Friday evening, after David had settled onto the sofa with his book, the dogs curled at his feet, the house quiet and warm, I knew it was time. My palms were sweating, my heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, and my throat felt impossibly tight. I walked into the living room, my legs feeling like lead, and sat on the edge of the armchair opposite him. He looked up, his face soft, questioning, completely unaware of the bomb I was about to drop. "David," I began, my voice barely a whisper, a mere rasp. "We need to talk." The words, though rehearsed 1,000 times, felt foreign on my tongue, heavy with an irreversible weight. I could already see the faint flicker of concern in his eyes, the beginning of the storm, and I knew, with a devastating certainty, that my carefully constructed world, our perfect life, was about to shatter into a million irreparable pieces.